Namaste. And as you can tell, pollen season has arrived early in Pensacola. So we've just spent a month going through Sri Aurobindo's booklet, The Mother. And it's always glorious to read it. And we've noted along the way that his experience of the many powers of the Shakti were at play in him dynamically from his earliest years in Pondicherry, in record from 1912. So years before he met the one whom he would eventually name as the Mother. And he describes how these several powers worked to effect changes in his sadhana and to propel his advance, to greaten him, as it were, not for his own purposes, but for what must have been a leading role in evolutionary advance. He came to write this series of essays, The Life Divine, as a primary way of expressing his view of the world, that it was a positive view, that the world has innate within it divinity which must be made to bloom, to blossom. He began yoga, as you know, not in search of anything other than a power that would help him achieve for India political independence. He took up yoga as a means of achieving that because he saw in people that had perfected it that they had enormous power psychologically, energetically, etc., and could reach their influence outwards. And he felt that if this were there, if there were a number of people who could so gain this power of yoga, it would propel India forward. They would be able to wrest free from British domination. That's how he began. And he agreed to sit for a period of 3 days. His would-be teacher, Lele, said, I need at least that much time with you. Sri Aurobindo, at the time Aurobindo Ghosh, said, I don't have 3 days because I'm busy with revolutionary politics. He said, if you can't give me 3 days, I can't give you what you're looking for. When eventually he did sit down on a rooftop in Baroda with Lele, he was given a simple instruction. And we've talked about it before. Within a moment or two, he recognized indeed that thought does not occur within us, in our head space, but it comes sweeping into us from outside. And that if he applied a force of will, he could stop those thoughts from penetrating his mental space. He could stop them cold, and he did. And he said in 3 days he had a silent mind. Others interpreted it differently and said it took him 3 days to completely silence it so that there was no disturbance, but that essentially he had that realization at once. What we would call in the Gita, Brahma Nirvana, the absorption of the person into Brahman, this timeless, spaceless reality. You can describe it according to your philosophy as being full or being void. To him, the universe looked like a cinematographic display, although he'd never seen cinema. But what is unique about Sri Aurobindo, he did not stop with this almost instantaneous realization of this vast reality that far exceeded all manifested world. He continued to work. He immediately went back into the field as soon as he could stand and walk and talk, because this is a powerful experience. One has to digest it. He resumed his political life and never intended ever to renounce the world and simply be one who has realized spirit and lives as an acolyte apart. No, not for him. He continued his work. Later, he was jailed by the British. And in that year that he spent in prison awaiting trial and going through the various phases of the trial, he said it became a trysting ground for him and the divine, because somehow he was led to experience not only this vast reality, impartite, timeless, spaceless, but that indeed, when he looked at the walls of the prison, he looked at the warder, he looked at the ants on his leg biting him. When he looked at his fellow prisoners, all he could see was the divine person looking back at him. And this became another crowning realization. The first, the realization of Brahman. That's the end of yoga for people who get there. For Sri Aurobindo, it continued into this, where he could see and feel the universe as the very substance of the divine person. And these two realizations were not in conflict, but they blended perfectly in his being. You've heard us use the image before of Nataraj, how the divine as a person is always seated in that transcendence. That's why Shiva has his eyes closed. He has never left the infinite, as he embraces and indeed expresses the universe in a swirling dance. And he leads you forward, and he pushes you back when you make an error. But somehow you always come back to him, and he encourages you and lifts you up and provides you with gracious assistance so that you can achieve your goal. So this was something akin to Sri Aurobindo's experience, because it was vast. He was always impersonal, but now he was like the Himalayas. And he always had love, but now it was a love beyond time. It was a love immediate and personal. He seemed to begin to embody these three stages of personhood, or statuses of being, that the Bhagavad Gita describes. First, the person moving in the world, the Kshara Purusha, the one who lives and dies, who has a vehicle, discards a vehicle, but another who is timeless and in the senses beyond it. That is what we call Atman. That is what we call the Akshara Purusha. But there is the third poise as well. Not in the world, not out of the world, but beyond both, but including both. The state of the Purushottama, the Supreme Person, who holds this vastness as a sort of ground of being upon which all things are built. So this became Sri Aurobindo's daily experience. By the time he gets to Pondicherry, he's worked out a new schedule for yoga, a new way to approach building a life that would emulate what he has seen in his vision, in the scope of what is possible. Because if there is an implied spirit. Come. If there is an implied immanent reality, it can't simply lie there unaddressed and unrecognized. To Sri Aurobindo, this idea of life divine is intimate to the nature of the universe. That this world, that being above, and each of us inside, carry a seed in us that can become alive, can remember what its original status was, and work out in terms of here and now, of what's to come, leaving behind former experiences, but keeping the sap from what we learned with that as we grow, as we go forward. So that advancement, he calls evolution, seizing on the term that Samuel Alexander and others had made very popular. It's an idea that was known to theosophy in the 19th century. It's not a new idea. It's a new term to describe what we all feel and can sense to be a momentum that is constantly building in the universe to exceed its current state, to transcend, to go beyond. What is the border? No border is secure with us, because the spirit wants innately to grow. Its whole business is to outgrow its former self. That's why we liken it to Agni, the divine fire, which consumes everything, lifts all up, and in the very smoke that rises, you find one's own transcendence, and we climb. So this idea of the life divine for Sri Aurobindo would be something wherein he, as an amateur, because he was never a professional philosopher, could set his thoughts out in a cogent way and say, this is where we're starting from. I think this is where we're going. And then the open question is, do you want to join me? And then it becomes practical. It lifts itself from being a vision into a scheme of being, a yoga. Who does it embrace? The community is not those who believe in or read a particular set of books, even his books. The community is the entire universe. The community has no boundary to it. Everything is a manifestation of the divine. He describes an omnipresent reality whose nature is existence, consciousness, and bliss. Sat, Chit, Ananda. This existence is omnipresent, as he says. But it grows through an application of force and will. And what is it seeking? Delight. The Taittiriya Upanishad got that correctly when it said at the crown of things, at the very top, the whole motive for making something manifest is delight. The manifest was always there. Manifest means to make it clear, to make it, in a sense, stand out prominently. It was never hidden. It was implied. But now it becomes overt. So he calls, at the beginning of this 4th chapter in Book 2, Part 1, one verse from the Isha Upanishad, and a few others too, but this one is important to us. The seer, the thinker. First one sees, then one thinks. The self-existent who becomes everywhere. A being who becomes. Indo-European idea, separating the two, has ordered perfectly all things from years sempiternal. Years implies that it is manifest, implies that we are now in the flow of time, but that things in the cosmos are an expression of an innate, perfect being from beyond. Here they don't seem so perfect. Now we have to examine that. He says in this opening paragraph, you let me read it for a second. The universe is a manifestation of an infinite and eternal all-existence. The divine being dwells in all that is. We ourselves are that in ourself, in our own deepest being. Our soul, the secret indwelling psychic entity, is a portion of the divine consciousness and essence. This is the view we have taken of our existence, but at the same time, we speak of a divine life as the culmination of the evolutionary process, and the use of the phrase implies that our present life is undivine, and all the life, too, that is below us. That's the first paragraph. It encapsulates what the rest of the chapter will deal with. So here he's rendering into philosophic terms the whole gamut of what is cosmic evolution. There is an omnipresence, but first it is a transcendent. The cosmic, the personal, are the other two terms of being, but they are in a sense drawn out or manifested from the omnipresent. And as we are evolving towards the disclosure of divinity, if you will, we reveal what is hidden within us, and we tap into the resources of the universe. And if we are in the vanguard, we meet the universe's questions back to us. What do you mean? How can you outgrow what I currently am? And so this long conversation between the individual and society, between the individual and the cosmos, between the individual calling upon the highest power, saying, I thought you sent me here for this. Why do you deny this? Begins to work itself out in the annals of human culture, and indeed in the pages of all spirituality around the world. So that revelation of what was hidden within us, this growth upwards, carries us through, if we can use the term, tortuous evolution. From a darkened state of ignorance, and what does ignorance mean? What we ignore. We ignore to begin the game. We begin by forgetting who we are and where we came from, and agree to become complicit in this universe. And we don the reality, but also the appearance of the ignorant. But we are forced to outgrow it, first by the mechanisms of nature, which in a sense propel the earliest stages of evolution. We have to lose to be able to win. We have to suffer to be able to greaten ourselves. We have to outgrow what we are, and so we are driven forward. This demands effort. We have to experience victory and defeat. This cosmic adventure is not easy or quick, and the world while it may hold within it a harmonizing divinity, is not on its surface that way. This is what we're here to work out. The felt presence of the divine, even when we experience, even if we realize what we are in essence above, if we're driven through the adventure of self-discovery to get beyond the borders of the mind and the sense life and arrive at spiritual equanimity and whatever that is which is beyond. That does not translate into a perfect life here. That gives you freedom from the vicissitudes in your inner being. It does nothing to change the outer nature. This is the challenge Sri Aurobindo feels that spirituality has ignored for thousands of years. That when we gain this spiritual victory, we must indeed return to the earth with the power, because consciousness is not absent power. Consciousness contains power within it. Power is native to consciousness, and we have every right and demand of our spiritual growth to bring it back with us into every inning of our life. So, perfection, if it is possible, requires the perfection of all. Our perfection apart isn't good enough. Our perfection, if it does not include our vehicle, isn't good enough. Our perfection, if it doesn't include the broad expanse of beings around us, all sarva bhutani, the Gita would say, all beings who are manifested, then we haven't finished our work. I'm not saying that we will finish our work, but I'm saying that the quest can't be left. We win the spiritual conquest, but we continue to work on that, just as Sri Aurobindo continued to work after realizing Brahman in 1908. He worked up until he left his body in 1950. Now, there is this idea that is expressed in Greek philosophy. The divine is not yet in being, but is becoming. This has been taken up by Teilhard de Chardin. It's a great idea, but again, it doesn't quite get to what we're driving at. Because we have, in a sense, to realize that transcendence. Not just that it has to appear in the stadia of time. Yes, but one first has to realize the eternity, to then implant the eternity here in time, so that eternity becomes sempiternity here. We meet limits, and we're stopped by those limits. That's good. Our rational mind would say, well, this is just realism, that we would be content with what perfection we can and not aspire beyond that we've reached the maximum of what we can do. Sri Aurobindo disagrees and says, that may be a rational approach, but it is not the mind really that carries us from stage to stage over the course of our evolution. It is this innate psychic essence in us that develops, as he would say, from being an entity into being. A psychic being results from the psychic entity and is a well-hewn jewel, an aspect of the Supreme Divine, aspiring to break all limits. To say that it's a diamond doesn't capture it because it's dynamic. It is like a fire that endlessly feeds on its own experience, which endlessly offers. The fire is that which offers its own being upwards, says, this is not mine, this is yours. It is not a selfish thing. It's willing to aspire to the beyond, to push past limited perfection and arrive at a perfect merger of being and consciousness and form. Participating in the collective and not restricted to the personal. That is a law of the human spirit. Here and now, ihaiva, not only within or above. It doesn't suffice simply to find the soul and rest in your own felicity, or to arrive at the absolute freedom of moksha and nirvana above. No, here you return and you apply that into the sinews of your flesh. If you don't return with that response, you've cheated nature. This spiritual potency can't remain hidden. It can't simply be implied. It has to unfold and reveal itself. So if you're still with me, our present nature is transitional. Imperfection is natural at the beginning, but every imperfection is a gate leading beyond itself to transcendence and to inclusion. We never grow by ourselves. We are always engaged in the commonality. So, in philosophy, we can support these experiences, because these are real experiences any aspirant can have. And reason has a role for us. It's fine to philosophize, to rationalize our experiences and form them into psychologies, to take our deepest thoughts and allow our aesthetic dimensions their full expression in these fields. But it's the soul's realization that is key. What is behind the mind? What is behind the heart and the emotions and the life energy? What is behind the body? What is it that took shape here? Who is that? What is that question? Who is that person? So, Sri Aurobindo affirms that there is an omnipresent reality, a being, a person who is, again, all-inclusive. And that includes whatever is dark, whatever is deformed, whatever is antagonistic, as the mother was depicted in his book a couple of weeks ago. All beings are her children, even those who are adverse and obscure, even the asura, the rakshasa, the pishacha. She doesn't forget any of them. She will bring them along in her own time. And we can use them. Their presence is a reminder to us when they can throw an astra at us and strike us. Well, now we know where we're weak. And some measure of gratitude. Thank you for allowing me to perceive this imperfection. I shall work upon that. We become stronger by dint of having faced the darkness. The second, all things, all ranges of being and becoming are governed by her, by the Chit Shakti, the conscious power who dominates all existence. The third, of course, the divine reality and the world reality are not fundamentally different. Sri Aurobindo has a passage, you can read this on page 420. Behind this limitation of power is the all-power. And in the limitation, that all-power is at work. This power to limit its force and to work through that self-limitation by what we call labor, struggle, difficulty, by what seems to us a series of failures or half-balked successes, and through them to achieve its secret intention is not therefore a sign, proof, or reality of weakness, but a sign, proof, reality, the greatest possible, of an absolute omnipotence. It can do it because it's free to do it. So suffering is a required consequence for a graded manifestation, a limitation of consciousness, a restriction of force, because we're not starting from perfection. We want to get there. And the souls who have come here into what seems to be a benighted universe have come here with full agreement. We were not thrust here. We didn't fall from heaven. We dove from a sea of light into a sea of darkness intentionally to say, this looks like a cosmic wager worth taking up. So here we are. And so we have to grow through suffering and then through endurance, titiksha, to finally get to fulfillment, siddhi. So our soul, if not our active mind, accepts and welcomes even contrary experience because it forces a stronger growth after direct denial. So we're driven transcendentally, universally, and personally towards perfection over incalculable periods of time so that we can rediscover the Ananda that is the fount, the very beginning of everything. So, nothing can cancel the essence of the divine. Death, suffering, diminution. This is the truth that you can realize here and now. And then how you are to bring it to bear in your active nature. You'll be guided according to your nature. This is true of the soul. It is true of the universal. Sat Chit Ananda, a conscious existent whose nature is delight, is ever present, undergirding every possible experience you meet. So, I think if I haven't put you all to sleep, I'll read a page or so from Savitri. I'll go to Book 4, the Book of Birth and Quest. Canto 4, The Quest. And I'll start towards the middle of page 381. A few and fit inhabitants she called to share the glad communion of her peace. The breadth, the summit were their natural home. The strong king sages from their labor done, freed from the warrior tension of their task, came to her serene sessions in these wilds. The strife was over. The respite lay in front. Happy they lived with birds and beasts and flowers and sunlight and the rustle of the leaves, and heard the wild winds wandering in the night, mused with the stars in their mute constant ranks, and lodged in the mornings as in azure tents, and with the glory of the noons were one. Some deeper plunged from life's external clasp, beckoned into a fiery privacy in the soul's unprofaned star-white recess. They sojourned with an ever-living bliss. A voice profound in the ecstasy and the hush they heard, beheld in all-revealing light. All time-made difference they overcame. The world was fibered with their own heartstrings. Close drawn to the heart that beats in every breast, they reached the one self in all through boundless love. Attuned to silence and to the world rhyme, they loosened the knot of the imprisoning mind. Achieved was the wide, untroubled witness gaze. Unsealed was nature's great spiritual eye. To the height of heights rose now their daily climb. Truth leaned to them from her supernal realm. Above them blazed eternity's mystic suns. Nameless, the austere ascetics without home, abandoning speech and motion and desire, aloof from creatures, sat absorbed, alone, immaculate in tranquil heights of self, on concentration's luminous, voiceless peaks, world-naked hermits with their matted hair, immobile as the passionless great hills around them, grouped like thoughts of some vast mood, awaiting the infinite's behest to end. The seers attuned to the universal will, content in him who smiles behind earth's forms, abode ungrieved by the insistent days. About them, like green trees girdling a hill, young, grave disciples fashioned by their touch, trained to the simple act and conscious word, greatened within and grew to meet their heights. Far wandering seekers on the Eternal's path brought to these quiet founts their spirit's thirst, and spent the treasure of a silent hour, bathed in the purity of the mild gaze that, uninsistent, ruled them from its peace, and by its influence found the ways of calm. Maybe that's a good place to end, and maybe we'll continue from there, from that place of calm, next time we meet. Well, I can't see all your faces, but those I can see look brilliant and happy. So, be well, be beautiful. Beauty after beauty. Namaste. Jai Ma.